Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of Precog Time. We're really happy to welcome Alex Chowaniec to talk with us today. Alex is an artist who is based in Brooklyn, and give me one second. Alex is an artist based in Brooklyn, and she's a co-founder of Chowaniec Projects, visualizing climate action through art. For Alex, the democratization of access to art is critical. Her goal is to expand how we achieve this, working in hybrid media, traditional and new, with the conscious goal of creating multiple access points for viewer engagement. She's shown extensively domestically and internationally, including and especially some local highlights being at the Knockdown Center, as well as OYG, Ortega y Gasset Projects, and Lorimoto Gallery. So we just wanted to say hi to Alex. And for those of you who don't know how the setup works, we'll be talking in this format where everyone is muted except for us for about an hour. We have a number of questions for Alex. We'll be showing some of her work along the way. If you have questions, please direct chat them to me. And I will ask them either as a clarification for what Alex is talking about, or we'll compile them and have a Q&A toward the end of the hour. And then at about 7 p.m., I allow everybody to unmute themselves, and we have like liberation chaos conversation, which is much more casual and can just sort of be checking in, hanging out, asking Alex about what she's doing, etc. So welcome. Thanks everyone for coming. And we've started these out for the past 10 weeks now, just by asking how quarantine has been for you, Alex. And in this case, like, how are you? Like, how are you? What are you thinking about? What is it like to make art right now for you? What is it like to be at home for you right now?
I think a lot has changed in the last 2 weeks in particular. I think in the very beginning of quarantine, I was still kind of trying to make work at my kitchen table, and that quickly shifted to me saying, okay, this is not what we need to be doing right now. We're an integral part of how we can help people on the front line. But it's very much an introspective time, I think, for a lot of it. And then this incredible moment of shifting to, now we need to go outside, now we need to protest, now we need to share and educate and speak out. And I think that that's something that we'll be doing for the rest of our lives if we haven't already been doing it for the first part of our lives. I think for me, I guess I wanted to share that I'm also going to be attempting a border crossing tomorrow. So that is definitely on my mind. I'm Canadian and I identify as such, and we'll kind of get into that a little later with my work. But I think that I also wanted to take the opportunity to share some of the articles that I thought were incredible coming out of the Canadian press that might not have made it to the US, that just open up what some of what the landscape could look like in terms of alternate police structures that would do social work and healthcare and education. And there are some really interesting models for that in the Indigenous communities in Canada. So that's where my brain has been at.
Yeah, it would be great if you could share those in the chat, and we'll post them along with your video when we put them up, when we put it up on the site. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that as well. And we can, I mean, if you want to, you can talk about that a little bit now. If you're feeling, if you would like to. If not, we can sort of jump right in.
I'm going to post the links because I think that they're coming from incredibly well-informed people, and I think we have to continue to share the resources. So that's going to be the most efficient way to do that.
Great. So I just wanted to start out asking you, before we get into the immediate projects that you've been working on now, I wanted to get in a little bit to your history. So you were trained sort of classically or traditionally as a painter. And I wanted to ask you how what that was like, and how since then how you've come to expand your practice beyond this sort of narrow framework to include more, like much more interactive works, like pieces which engage audiences, the use of really diverse technologies, from 3D printing to different kinds of sculptural modeling, projection, etc., and how you relate to painting and this kind of training in history.
That is a very multifaceted question, and I've been giving an enormous amount of thought from a standpoint that I think that I wouldn't so much say that I was trained or sought to be trained in classical painting. I think that from my earliest possible memories, my idea of capturing and apprehending the world was very much through the body. And I think that, as I grew older and in high school, we're doing, I would go to night school and do figure drawings. And I just, like, for me, it was very much always about the body. And then at a certain moment in time in university, I realized that, like, my love of paint, and I think the aptly named topic today of alchemy, became about how can we make paint itself flesh? How can we bring it closer to the body? And at the time, that meant seeking out someone. There were no kind of study abroad programs that took up studio practice with my undergraduate degree, so we made one up, and eventually kind of navigated our way through it. And that's where I found myself studying painting in Italy with a Norwegian artist by way of South Africa, who was a colleague of William Kentridge, who really was a kind of merging of what it meant to be a representational painter and to think about the alchemy of the material itself, how we could learn from and make our own materials, and how we could address kind of larger, or I guess this is my takeaway from it, larger conflict and trauma with paint made flesh. So that was my jumping off point for my early aesthetics.
Alex, isn't an old painting of yours hanging right behind you?
Yes, it is.
um,
Yeah. I mean, I guess, so this painting is about 10 years old. And I was doing a series of these large scale double portraits, and they are very oozy and, again, very, very sort of textured, and they spoke to this idea of inter and intra relationships that we have inside of ourselves and with others, and the tensions. And that's definitely something that's carried through the arc of my work in general. And at a certain point, I just realized that I wanted to expand my language. If we were going to talk about painting and the capacity for painting and paint to be made flesh, to become the thing, then that sort of speaks about, in the same way that language, it's not a representation of a thing, it can be the thing itself. And with that came how I would perceive the performativity in creating a painting. And then it just moved outwards from there.
so as a good follow-up, I was gonna ask you then, maybe we could talk about the project that you just developed for the Villa Terrace Museum in Milwaukee, and sort of talk about this idea of incarnation or representation as a kind of incarnation, and sort of talk about what the project means and how you've related this idea of art becoming the thing itself to a concept of like environmentalism or a focus on ecological justice. Yeah. So I'm gonna pull up some of the images to start. I know these are like big questions. Kelly, Flo, do you have anything you want to add yet? No, later.
Yeah, a lot of questions. And let her.
Yeah.
Um, the so the exhibition on at Villa Terrace Museum in Milwaukee, this opened in February. It is still inside the museum that is closed. And we've been working together to, instead of just represent the content, to create new digital extensions of the pieces. But what you're seeing here is work that spans 2014 to this year. And it's a series of large-scale charcoal drawings, as well as this 3D printed sculpture that is covered in gold leaf and ultramarine blue or lapis paint, as well as glitter. And then there's another 3D printed piece, which was the first piece in the project, which I think I should probably start by talking about, because yeah, it should be up there. There we go. Yes, so the idea to start, I spent a number of years working outwards from painting in new media, and this piece came about the way all of these projects are coming about. They're coming as a conversation directly about the body and the landscape. This started as bark that I collected from a fallen tree in Canada that became this sculptured form that I sort of saw as a crest form. And then I scanned it and was exploring 3D printing as a way of really directly addressing Canada's relationship with its natural resources, and being something that we often misconstrue as our identity, when in fact it's our connection to the landscape, and that we have to start thinking about how we use our brains and our intellectual capital to create change, as opposed to the damage that we do from reaping our natural resources. And this form became an emblem of that. I thought of it as a crest. I thought of it as something that represented not only a family lineage, but a cultural lineage. And then, of course, like all my work, it just looks like an organ. And the decision for it to be covered in charcoal was, again, a direct reference to the tar sands, to softwood lumber, to burning of a body. I sort of thought of it as an eclipse moment. And shortly after completing it, I wanted to activate it in a sanctuary space. I wanted to position it in a way that people would understand the work that it needed to do and that we needed to do. So very early on of having kind of birthed it into the world, this was at a point where I was really radically shifting my practice. This is about 2015. And I wanted to be able to put this in a space. So this is in an empty room in my studio building that they gave to me for a month. And the sculpture was installed in the room. And there were a series of kind of rules and procedures for participants to be able to enter the space one at a time. I've always loved the curatorial idea of a one picture gallery, even though it's wildly impractical. So this is my adaptation of it. And anybody could come in, people who were in the building, people who made appointments. And the concept was that once you close the door behind you, you could take as long as you needed with the piece itself. And it was the first time I was thinking about what it meant to create sanctuary in urban spaces, what it meant to set up this sculpture and this media in a space. So that's what we're looking at.
And so this is just sort of not to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but just sort of fleshing out some of the ideas that you're talking about in relation to your work. So on the one hand, in this piece, like the idea that Here, hold on. I want to share first the picture of you collecting the wood. Up here, Alex gathering bark. But the idea that like the bark could come to be this kind of icon. It was something which was given freely, or something which you found inside of a natural environment, which by virtue of the relationship to like the by virtue of the kind of myth of nature vis-a-vis Canadian identity. Am I getting this right? That like because of this connection, just the bark itself can become a kind of symbol for a relationship to the landscape or a relationship to an environment. And that, in a sense, the treatment of the piece as a kind of singular object inside of a dark room also has like really iconic, like it has a really iconic kind of read, like you're forcing someone to stay with the unitary sign in this way and kind of contemplate the object or the form as an icon and not just as like a myth or as a landscape. Am I getting this somewhat? Am I like in the range of interpretation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was set up to look a little bit like a secular chapel, and there was actually a concrete bowl underneath that was filled with water, and there was a skylight above. And at the time, based on the series of appointments and when they were, the room would go from daylight to darkness, and you could eventually see the moon reflected in the pond in the bowl underneath it. And I think that wanting to set up that relationship as a reminder that if we see ourselves, if we see our bodies in the landscape, then we are accountable to it, we are responsible, and that's the moment at which it's a call to take direct action.
And so was this the first piece, was this a piece that was happening simultaneous or just after Stardust?
No, it was all before.
Okay.
So this was the genesis, actually. It was like sort of this was the genesis of Stardust came afterwards. And to be clear, Chowaniec Projects was launched in 2017, so a year later. And it's a collaboration that I have with my sister, who is based in Vancouver. I do not know if she is on the call. She is. And this again speaks to this multiplicity and this expanding outwards of media and of identity, because my sister is not an artist. She studied biology, and she launched her own company, an ecotourism company, to take people up the Inside Passage in British Columbia. And she's subsequently working for a wonderful nonprofit that brings kids into the landscape through the guidance of volunteer professionals in the community. So it's only to say that the genesis of Chowaniec Projects was that, okay, we were both coming from the same feeling of connection to the landscape and needing Canadians and everyone else to understand and value that. But we're coming at it from two totally different places. So we're just kind of closing the loop in terms of how you can open up the conversation and the accessibility that is critical.
So I'm gonna play a little animation, a short animation clip that sort of frames Stardust, but also I'm interested in the meantime in hearing a little bit about your relationship to the one-on-one experience, like the importance of creating context for one viewer to have an experience, or one or two viewers to have a kind of experience which can be solitary and bracketed, sort of starting with this sort of genesis piece that you've talked about, moving to Stardust, and then a couple of other projects which have had sort of similar parameters of a one-to-one relationship. I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about that as well.
I think it's important to acknowledge that this is sort of like two things have to happen simultaneously. There's always the relationship that one is hoping to set up, whether you're a painter or a sculptor or new media or filmmaker, which is that one-on-one moment where you're communicating directly with a person. If the work you've made is the thing itself, and that is the communication, that is the point. To create these one-on-one performances with that explicitly in mind, in my mind, has to happen simultaneously with resources being accessible in the digital field. So while we have the travel agency, which I'll get into it in a moment, and I think I'll kind of set up a clearer timeline for Chowaniec projects on that, all of these one-on-ones, including what we just talked about, Gloria Patria in the room, in the chapel on its own, that was accompanied by a digital guest book in which people wrote down their experiences. They spoke about what they did in the room. So it's there. All of these projects have these extensions that I think are really important.
So Stardust is a project that you and your sister as Chowaniec project made together, which is sort of like a 10-foot square geodesic dome.
It is
16
16
feet.
feet.
16
It is.
feet, yeah.
Having tried to squeeze it into a 14-foot room, I can tell you how big it is.
16-foot geodesic dome that has projections, open source projections of the night sky on that are projected onto the ceiling. So I just wanted to give everyone a sort of visual reference. And this is a proposal for the project, Alex, is that correct? The animation, or is this sort of a rendering of what the experience might be like?
It started out as like a storyboarding animation that for proposal purposes, and then we went on to, so this is Jason Trinidad is an artist based in LA who helped us out with this video when we kind of storyboarded it together, to give you a sense of what the actual experience is. So yeah. So this is very early, and what I want to set up for the timeline is when my sister and I got together, the idea was that we could do these collaborations that were more complex and greater than the bandwidth that I had to do on my own, and that she would be adding this component in terms of her research and her experience in the landscape itself. It's also very political. We talked to a lot of, we have a reference actually in one of our proposals from the Canadian Minister of the Environment, who specifically said, I want to teach every Canadian kid to canoe. So like this became very political in terms of connecting the body to the landscape. I know, right? And it's amazing. So and we ended up, in fact, the Governor General, the Lieutenant, came to came to my studio in New York. So like I need to say that this is very political. All of my work is, but this is quite specific in terms of wanting to be in communication about legislation, both nationally and internationally. So this project, this dome, started with this visualization of the canoe, again, another iconic Canadian symbol. And as you see in the animation, the person takes their shoes off, and that, again, that sense of a ritual of entering a space. This is at Wall Space Gallery, Train Yards in Canada, who were the first ones to host the exhibition. And there's a dome, and you can actually see a series of watercolors, which I'll talk about afterwards, which accompanied it. And so this was a way of making that first experience that I talked about mobile. We could take the dome with us. We could shift the interior contents based on the local identification with a particular landscape, while the cloud-sourced sky imagery became something that of the stars would become something that would be consistent. And so then we actually later took this to Times Square, through Chishama to the old Condé Nast building at 4 Times Square, and it just kind of expanded outwards even more.
So can you talk a little bit about the watercolors and the watercolors in relation to the Stardust project?
Yes. So the watercolors, again, came before this, but were originally called Planets, Stars, and Atoms. And as you can see in the animation, that sort of moment where the reflection of the stars in this glassy water are projected on your own body. Again, the thing that relates to alchemy and that carries through all of the work as the arc is that all of our atoms in our body are the same as the atoms in the stars, and we are stardust. And of course, Neil deGrasse Tyson said that in a far more articulate way, but that is the point. And the watercolors, I think, launch into a specific theme of this evening, which is healing. And I made them in 2015 after my father passed away of cancer. And this idea of our body in the landscape was expanded to our body in the universe. And this series of watercolors was something that I could do as a ritual every day at a difficult time. I made hundreds of them, and they included text from palliative care professional who outlined the stages of actively dying when you go from hours to minutes to death. There, in this particular, there are many different ways that this happens, but in the case of cancer, you can present clinical stages of death and dying. And so there's text along the bottom of the pieces that speaks to this. Visually, they sort of look like petri dishes or planets. So this was really the first time that I directly hit that head on, even though healing and cancer and have been subjects in my work before.
Alex, can you talk a little bit about the healing tarot?
Oh, yeah.
Did that come after or before?
Yeah.
The healing tarot is now. I just finished. Actually, and if I could go back for one more second, right before the Planet, Stars, and Atoms were created, while my father was receiving treatment, I was working on these large-scale charcoal drawings of fungus. And there were about 17 pieces, and they were for my first solo exhibition in Montreal. And they're really on the scale of the body. And they're called the Growth Series because it is directly kind of getting at that question of the growth of a tumor or the growth of health in a positive sense and the simultaneous decay that comes with that. So the aesthetics of them were physically about putting material down and pulling it back. It's about these tight wrapped spaces that just open up and expand. And the mushrooms themselves became a way of speaking about how the natural environment can provide resources for healing.
And so just to sort of follow, it's interesting to talk about your work because I feel like you're someone who has a lot of really clearly developed ideas and then tries to find ways to weave them all in with one another in different ways for each project. So in some ways it's like, it can be kind of, I think, intentionally difficult to detangle the kind of braid you've woven in each series to see like how things come together. And so I that's just a brief interlude to ask. So these works were then also casts of the mushroom drawings, or casts that you extruded from the mushroom drawings. Is that correct?
They were casts of the collection of mushrooms themselves.
Okay.
So all of these projects, as I say, begin with this collection from memories or objects from the landscape. And so this was really a practical way of preserving them.
You also do a lot of interviews, right, with mycologists?
So all of these kind of conversations have been informal in the past, but there's a lot of research that goes behind these projects. And the the fungus and the mycology was really the first time that I dug deep into it. I mean, fungus itself is something that I'd always collected. It's part of my, for my Polish heritage, it's a national pastime, foraging for mushrooms. So again, a big part of our identity. And it's this flow through, and fungus is like, we are more similar to fungus than any other kingdom. We share the same pathogens. It is a profound connection to this organism, which is the largest on the planet, and it is a sentient being. It knows when you are with it. And so that became a critical metaphor for, and not even metaphor, the thing itself for talking about dealing with cancer in the body.
Well, it also seems like it's a really functional model for the kind of scaling up and down that you do in your work. Like the system of spores connects like the colony of a specific kind of mushroom, which might be very wide, and like pops up, like it appears as specific mushrooms in one location or another. But like, when you're dealing with the mushroom itself, you're dealing with the network of spores, the individual mushroom, and then the apparent mushroom colony. And I feel like similarly in your work, it's like you're dealing with the concept of care, and it pops up in relationship to your personal experiences with like palliative care, like loss, right? How to care for someone in your immediate family, to like then trying to expand that into how that situates you in relationship to the care for your environment, and then how like that might be extruded into a model for how other people can be taught this care, like and modeled. There's like a kind of modeling enterprise, which is something that you could see, for instance, in the offshoot of Stardust that we didn't get to talk about yet, which is the travel agency, where you're like, I've gathered all of this knowledge about how to have a relationship with the environment, and now I'm going to expand this network and use this one-on-one travel agency experience to give people a way to bring this into their lives in a certain sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the arc of my whole work is a network. It is like mycelium, and all of these different micro and macro iterations of it are about crystallization of experience that's both personal and shared. And the medium itself, for that reason, is about, and for the years that I spent in film, taught me you have to find different ways to engage with your audience, and creating these extensions is a clear way of doing that while they're all speaking to the same common thread of healing and of the body and the experience of the body in the landscape, and our profound interconnectivity, which again is the kind of basis and thesis of my work. And do you want me to talk about the travel agency?
I feel like we should stay with the healing tarot for a little while, because I feel like we're in this world and we can talk about.
You want to pull up the images, Gabby?
Yeah, I will. We had a question which was just, what kind of mushroom, what kind of fungus is this? Which I think is probably good to clarify now. But
yeah, so the piece that we're looking at, the biggest one, that's a reishi mushroom, which is used in a lot of traditional Chinese medicine to help circulate, for circulation in the system. So it can be used if you're I'm speaking from what I learned from others, not from, I'm not an expert, but to help circulate either other substances that you're taking or to improve oxygenation and circulation for your health during cancer treatment. Oxygenation is really important because oxygen kills cancer.
So this is the Healing Tarot as a set.
So this is something that I have been thinking about for 5 years. And I have only put this down to paper in the last couple of months. And it should also be noted that this is accompanied by a text, as are all traditional decks. I'm not going to call it a tarot deck, or rather I should say it's a healing deck. I call it tarot just as a way to help people understand how to experience the cards.
So how did you think about these, like the kinds of archetypes that you chose to represent or that you chose as cards?
Well, first of all, I should say the reason why I chose cards at all is because I think while you're going through with caring for a loved one with cancer, it's kind of impossible to read like a tome. No one is ever in the mood for that. So I thought a lot about how people who I often didn't really know very well helped me out over the years, just by asking very simple questions of how are you, or what are you doing, like what are you working on, in this sense of like indirect relation to my dad's treatment. And I realized that I wanted to create a discursive tool to help other people, loved ones, who don't quite know always what to say or how to start a conversation. And so the cards are a way of opening that up, and each one is accompanied by a question and by a short statement, as well as some very personal anecdotes of my experience with my dad that kind of underpin the whole project. And I think, as is always the case when it's very personal, I think it paradoxically allows other people to enter that space through vulnerability.
So is this an ongoing project?
Yeah, well, it's almost done, actually, which I'm really excited about. I'm just finishing the final edits on the text. But I guess, like,
how are people going to experience it?
So they're going to be physical cards, but I also want to make the PDF available with the accompanying book. Mm. But I guess if I could take a moment to kind of briefly talk through why I chose the titles, I think it's really important to understand this project. Mm. And I'm going to try to make it as tight as possible, because it doesn't actually exist as a text. Like when you open a book and you read about tarot cards, it's never like the Fool, one sentence. It's like, yeah. So to kind of I will put a couple of words to each one to kind of hit the point home. And while this is arranged in a linear way, it's not intended to be linear. I want people to feel like they can jump into it at many different points, which you can. It's really based off of my personal experience from the initial diagnosis to where I am now, and that's what I want to share. So the dragon card is, and all of these words came to me really clearly when I was actually writing an email to a friend that I wanted to share this experience with. And so the dragon is like that first moment that you hear the diagnosis, that you either speak it or you read it or someone communicates it to you, and that thing that was once mythical becomes very real, named after like the crab cancer. It's a physical experience, it's a realness, and it's terrifying. The tunnel is that space that you enter immediately afterwards that will, moving forward, underpin everything you think and do and say. And it's a place of incredible darkness, and there isn't yet that hope that comes from experiences of speaking to others or learning more. So the hunt is really that moment that you are committed to learning everything you can, to pulling all your resources together, to talking to everybody you possibly can to help that person or help yourself, that stage of medical exploration and investigation. And the toast is the shift when you coexist with it. You never live with cancer, but you coexist with it. And it's that moment where you celebrate a person's life, and it can seemingly go on forever. The vigil is the moment in which there's the switch to the person actively dying and to some of the stages that I had spoken about in the watercolors, Planet, Stars, and Atoms, clinical observations, where you go from hours to minutes to, and you bring people around you, or you have people around you, and you're in this vigil together. And I call the actual moment of death, which is, it's called the gate, which is just one over from the intruder, because I don't think that death in this scenario, I think of it as a passage. It's the other way slightly, the trees in the forest. And again, it's kind of unsurprising, I think, that I chose trees or the landscape, the forest, as the representation of that passage from life to death. And the intruder is kind of the first person who enters the scene. And that's kind of that moment of passage of you being with a person who is alive to a corpse is interrupted, and all of a sudden there's a realness to that. The flowers is really about the community. It's around the rituals that you have, whether it's a funeral or a wake. It's about other people's grief and your need to support them. It's really not a moment for you to mourn. It's not possible. So the light is this moment where everybody goes home and you come to terms with what has happened, or you begin to, and you begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel, quite literally. The fire is kind of when the light, that flame of hope kind of turns into a fire. There's a reckoning in that. I think you create an enormous amount of change in your life. It's very destructive and necessary because you apprehend what's really important. So the moment after that, the ashes is what is left. And it is a new beginning. It is fertile, and it is a place to start from. And the meadow is kind of the rest of your life, where you continue to nourish and learn from your experiences. You carry it with you, but it's a place of new growth. And I think the thing that's most meaningful to me is the lake, which is you can always return to the memories of that person. And I think of being in a lake and just being surrounded and immersed in that. And whenever you want to or need to, it's not a physical place, you can return to that.
Thanks, Alex. This is I wanted to briefly kind of just touch on, because I know we're coming up to the point where we'll start asking some of the questions which have been coming in. But I wanted to kind of circle back to ask you about your relationship to materiality, and perhaps to translation, because a large part of your project is about the apprehension of an object and then performing it or making it over and over again using these really varied means. And for instance, in the later Gloria Patria piece, I think it's such a great example of this, because on top of the tree bark, which has been 3D printed, you've also really intentionally gold leafed it and also coated it in ultramarine. So you have this like technological representation of a natural object, and then this like symbolic attachment of materiality on top of this technological manipulation. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about materiality.
I think that all these direct and indirect processes teach us, they sort of teach us about all of it, about this crystallization of experience. I mean, specifically that gold leaf and ultramarine blue in the history of Western art was a representation of a celestial space. And this was really about speaking to this idea of sticking your head into the universe. It's something that's very physical. But at the same time, by choosing 3D print, by choosing to speak to the technology, the possibilities of it, the thing itself, and how it's made, 3D printing, I mean, it's the extrusion of material. And then inside, there's a honeycomb that you've decimated the material. And the charcoal drawings speak to that process as well. And I think the more people understand and can use these media in relation to each other, it can help educate them on how they can use it as a tool to take into their own fields and their own interests. I mean, yeah.
And so in this sense, would you say then that your use of, sorry, I don't know what's going on with preview right now. It's very unhappy. That your use specifically of these kind of like new media is a way to, or I guess maybe there won't be a leading question. Like, what is your relationship to newer technology as opposed to like the replication by the hand, for instance?
I think it's critical to have a dialogue between handmade and technology. I think technology is a tool that we'll always need to wield with an understanding that comes from how to make things and how to communicate. And if you can't put those things together, they can't be in conversation with one another. And the charcoal drawings themselves, the idea of physically putting material down or taking it back with an eraser, we do the same thing when we engage with 3D print. And if we understand how to use that tool, then we can take it into other fields of innumerable, infinite possibilities. And I think that it reminds us also of what is finite or what is infinite. So this project, which started out about using 3D print to speak to the possibilities of human capital and technology over natural resources, has become a much greater call to think about how technology engages with what is finite and what is infinite in the future of our planet.
Do you have a sort of way that you set it up, like drawings first and then technology, or do you ever go back and forth and you find like a different outcome based on that?
Yeah, I actually started with the 3D print. That first sculpture was the first one, and then I returned to the charcoal drawing to be able to pull that apart and sort of help people understand how this technology functions.
Alex, before we do questions, I was wondering if you have any recommendations for healing at this moment.
Well, while we didn't get to it, the Stardust Travel Agency, there was a moment when that was going to be it was going to have an extension of this kind of micro experience where people could go out into the landscape and share like super local experiences of what it meant, things that were special in the local parks or state parks, which are still open at this moment in time. I think it's important to understand I'm really to speak to the idea of self-care. This is something that does not have to be something coming from outside of us. It can be something that is an internal landscape, a sanctuary. And now that we have spent so much time at home, I've personally realized that it's little things that have been really, really profound. I mean, there's no easy solution, but sticking your head under a cold shower and just hearing the water over your ears is like a reminder of what it is to be alive and to be connected, to stretch your body, to reach up to the sky. I mean, opens up your lungs and you can breathe. It's these things that keep us healthy as we can be at this time, and enables us to read and share and march and do everything that we need to do.
So there are a couple of questions that have come in, and if anybody else wants to send a question for like this sort of bracketed portion of the talk, please send them along. After, I will make everything free, including the chat. For now, everything is closed down just because earlier on in Zoom, there were all these accounts of Zoom calls being bombed and kind of interrupted by other folks. So as a sort of, even though this is a pretty like closed community, as a trust measure, we keep it closed for the beginning section. But Drea has a question comment talking about macro and micro aesthetics and scalability, which is, she says, there's such a relationship between macro and micro aesthetics, which mirrors the relationship between humanity and the natural world, which is also nuanced and scalable and spiritual. How do you use technology or seek to use technologies to highlight this relationship? Both painting and drawing, but also scanning and printing. I love thinking of the printing as a method of growth as much as building a series or building up a drawing. And so I don't know if you have any response to this, or you want to kind of add on to or reflect on Drea's point.
That is a beautiful, complete thought. I mean, I think that's it. I think that, you know, this idea of planets, stars, and atoms, and to understand technology as something that we can both go inwards to our smallest cells and send people out into space and into the deepest of oceans. We can chase, as we are doing now, pathogens and disease. And we need, in order to do that, to have an understanding of how it functions. And if we can use other processes to open it up, the understanding of a tool, that is what is critical.
So I just had a quick question too, which is, it feels like this is a good point in the conversation to briefly ask you about your relationship to aesthetics. Like, do you think of a relationship to aesthetics as distinct from a relationship to objects or experiences?
I'm laughing because I feel like the word that has come up like in my entire history of art making has been this tension between what is ugly and what is beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I think that my relationship to it is, as I say, when the thing that you're wanting to express, the anger, the healing, when you communicate it in whatever medium, it becomes the thing itself. And however that comes out, sometimes it's oozy and messy, and sometimes those marks are tight. They have to be, they are the thing itself.
Jill wants to know whether the tarot project is completed and what new projects you're working on now.
The tarot project, I'm so, as I say, excited to finish the text booklet to accompany it, because I really want to, I'm very excited for it to be in Precog's upcoming edition.
Right.
And I'm excited for that to take a digital form first, and then in time it will be cards. But I kind of wanted this DIY approach in which people could take it and print it and, you know, cut them up and navigate it as both a digital and a physical object.
Yep. Cool. I feel like people are gonna want to hang out and chat for a minute. Like, there's a lot of activity in terms of comments and questions in the group chat. So how does everyone feel about liberation of the conversation?
Let's do it.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Thank you all for coming. Please hang out for a little while. You're all allowed to unmute yourselves now.
Thank you so much for hosting Precog, Gabby, Flo, and Kelly.
We're so happy to get to talk to you.
I guess, or sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Randy.
No, I was just wondering, like, it seems so ambitious to make a tarot deck, and like, I'm just wondering how you started going about it, and like, you know, what were your inspiration for the archetypes, and like, you have totally new words for, like, it's not like a standard tarot deck. So I'm just wondering, like, how you arrived at, like, is it going to be 78 cards like a normal tarot deck, or is it like a different amount? And like, I don't even know the whole structure of your tarot deck.
That's it. There are 13. And
13, okay.
I didn't decide, like, I wasn't like, I'm going to stop at 13. It actually came about, as I say, by like writing an email to a friend who was going through this. And I was like, this is what happened. And it includes a lot of personal detail. And I just felt at the time that I was like, I can't send this to her. She's not there yet. She's not ready for it. But I need to put this out in the world. And it, as I wrote it and kind of scanned it, these words just, and visual images popped out very clearly. And so that came first, and then the visualizations came after. And I kind of like to think that maybe 13 was like very appropriate because my dad, in his eternal sense of humor, died on Friday the 13th before Valentine's Day.
Oh, that's like very spooky.
So that it somehow felt very appropriate. And
wow.
Yeah.
So are you gonna have like instructions on how to pull cards or whatever? Because there's like the Celtic cross and like whatever, but I don't know, like maybe there's a specific way of dealing with your deck.
I don't think that there is, but I'm definitely going to include a couple of different models for people to explore. I think what's most important is that each of the cards comes with a question. So I think it's what ensues from that question, what is opened up, and who you choose to share it with, that is most important. Because otherwise you don't, as I say, with all trauma and people that you are wanting to support as they go through it, you don't always know what the right questions are to ask, let alone the answers. So I call it a discursive tool. I call it a healing deck. I've used the word tarot, but only as a way to begin to help people understand how they can use them.
Are you writing the text yourself, or are you collaborating with someone?
No, I just wrote it. I wrote it myself with the framework of, I had journal entries of kind of critical moments that had happened in the timeline, and pulled from those and then fleshed out something that I hope that people can, while it's specifically designed for people with loved ones going through cancer who have died of cancer, because so many of us are experiencing this at a younger age, I do also want it to be a way for people to be able to talk about other forms of trauma. And also, Randy, it's really good to see your face and talk to you, because you're correspondent.
Good to meet you, and thank you for like all your email recommendations and everything.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I just want to say it's like really intense and beautiful, the healing deck that you've like put forth. Like, you're like, we're not talking about it glibly at all, but it's like, I feel like it's so powerful when I think about how your work carves out, like, when we talk about like subjectivity in art making, or the like how we display or share our art, and we talk about like sharing and subjectivity and how we talk about or like encounter artwork. Like your work, like not just the deck, not just the healing deck, but also all of your work really makes so much space for a subjective experience of your audience in a way that I think is like very I don't know, like this talk's called healing. Like it just, you make, I just think it's a really interesting and important space for you to create. And that's like the point, that's what you're getting at. And it's like, it feels so consistently apparent through the work that you're making. And I just want to say that. That's it.
Thank you. That's the goal. That's the point. Thank you for expressing that.
Alex, what are you researching now? Anything new?
She's like, I'm just finishing this tarot deck.
Like, I don't know. Because I feel like you're always like maybe doing a lot of things at the same
It's a
time.
huge
Right?
undertaking.
I'm pretty squarely in that space.
You gotta finish. Okay.
It's been like, as I say, well, it's been in my brain for 5 years. It was really only in December that I wanted to write this email. And so then it's been, I mean, yes, it's been 5 months, but it's been insane. And I finally challenged myself to read Siddhartha Mukherjee's The Emperor of All Maladies. I mean, I had connected with Siddhartha through Sarzi when I worked for them and the State Department at the U.S. Biennial in Venice in 2013. So, and the team at New York Presbyterian was part of my father's treatment program. So a lot of resources had been in my hands for a really long time, but while I just said quite specifically when I was speaking about the tarot that you can't read it at the time. It's really hard. You just are trying to get through surviving. And so I think I'm kind of retroactively doing a lot more research and reading around where we are with cancer treatments. So I guess there's the answer to your question. You know, where have we come with immunotherapy in 5 years? What are, that 5 years ago, that's what we were writing and talking about. Where are we now? And so, yeah.
One of the things through your work that I found really compelling is the sort of hole in the center, which is such a beautiful metaphor for grief. And the first piece, let's see, the patria is part of the name, is almost like Plato's cave, where there's light, but it's really in the distance. I know the room was contained, but on a computer screen. When I saw that, the first thing that occurred to me was the cave, and the idea of the ideal being a little bit beyond you. The cards where you have the sort of almost snake-like form with the center empty is very powerful, and that sort of encasing, which you have as well, and the piece that's gold leafed, the encasing, but what is within the shell is the empty space. And to me, that was very moving, and extremely articulate, and obviously deeply felt, because it goes from work to work to work.
I think that, Abby, first of all, thank you for joining. It's wonderful to see
Oh,
you.
I'm so glad. We never got our studio visit, so now we have it a bit. I was just as I was going to go to Alex's I called her. I said, I don't know. I sort of haven't taken the subway since last week, and decided we postpone it. So,
This was the second week in March, and it was that
yeah,
we had scheduled for. So it was a radical moment.
exactly.
But to speak to these forms, like both the idea of a vessel, the inside, the outside, the moving inwards and moving outwards, that is very much what happens both in the paintings and in the sculptures and in the digital forms. And I think it is most important to how we understand how bodies can contain these feelings and these experiences, and how we can't, and how we're just this porous mass that's connected to something beyond ourselves that we hope in a lifetime we can only begin to explore and connect with, and perhaps more so in death.
Thank you.
And actually, just on a practical note, I know Martha is with us. Martha Wilson spent time in the room and left a entry in the digital journal, and the light that's coming from behind that form. I spent a lot of time, speaking of aesthetics, to try to render that. So instead of using LED lights or a screen, it's actually glow sticks because the quality of light.
Wow.
I can't even tell you, my fingers, like I would spend like a good half hour breaking the tubes to put behind the thing behind the sculpture before people would enter the room, because the quality
That's fabulous.
of that, it was remarkable.
It's the rave, Alex. We all have to go to the dance.
God, maybe that's it. Mushrooms, right? Like what? I'm a closeted psychedelic, but that's not true.
Well, I was gonna ask like what particular mushrooms or like mycelium you were drawn to, or are there particular fungi that you were drawing like in particular, or is it stuff that you came across locally, or is it stuff that you sought out?
It was both. It was, first of all, they're all things that I collected. And so that was important. And they were either dried or not dried. And they were either because I'd read that they had specific healing qualities, or because it was part of the immediate landscape. There were many that didn't make it in that I just, I've been mushroom hunting in the Balkans, and often the ones that are most beautiful are most poisonous. But in any case, it was very much about what I could collect and their healing capabilities. And it was just the tip of the iceberg. And the idea of preserving them afterwards was important. And that's where that kind of, again, a reference to technology, the squares looks like this little 8-bit animation. And that's how I wanted to keep them, because there's a lot more learning to do there. But if you're interested, I suggest that you start with Stamets. He's in the Bay Area and has some great texts on mycology. There's also a female-led team of an artist and mycologist in the Bay Area called MycoWorks that are doing some really cool things with how you can use mycelium as a building block, which is incredible. They're only just beginning to explore that technology because it floats, and yet it is incredibly strong, and it is the qualities are remarkable.
Alex, sorry, were you going to say something, Esther?
Yeah, could you say that again? The mycelium technology, what was that?
It's called MycoWorks.
There's also a Facebook group I can post on here, but it's about like the different things you can do with mushrooms and mycelium, people developing, like like you were saying, it's a very like durable material, and it's being developed as like something that can replace like building materials and that sort of thing, like leathers and
they've used it in bioremediation as well. I mean, it's like it's incredible.
Randy, are you also like looking into the mushrooms research?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at this point, I like at my core, I feel like I'm in the phase where modern art is like completely not meaningful. It's like not meaningful. Sorry, I've had a lot of tequila also, but I'm like, I'm shifting from art, and I'm like trying to like going back to school for botany and but yeah, so I'm starting to grow mushrooms and learning a lot more about mycelium and that sort of thing.
Yay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let us keep in touch on that. I'd love to hear what you learn.
Yeah, definitely. I'm starting out with a few different species, so yeah, let's definitely keep in touch.
Alex, so what's gonna happen tomorrow?
Everybody
post
just
this Facebook group.
Claudia!
Mom is crossing all of her cells.
How long is the drive?
It's hard to say right now because the traffic patterns are altered, but I'm hoping we can make it to the border in 6 or 7 hours.
That's not so bad.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm not gonna, I will, yes, please send us hope and best wishes. Because we are
you're
preparing
for
energy.
Definitely.
You're gonna make it.
You're gonna make it. I just can't get over the fact that like there's no rules other than the subjective opinion of particular border agents. Like,
Fly in too, and like a lot of people don't know that.
Well, the problem with the flying in is that you may be redirected to a government quarantine facility, whereas if you drive, you can go directly to self-quarantine. Yeah.
I hate to like harp on mushrooms forever, but how many different mycologists did you talk to? I feel like when you would casually draft, you're like, I've been doing extensive interviews with mycologists for years. I was like, where are they? Like,
it's like, I think probably 3 of them identify as mycologists, 2 in the Bay Area, 1 in New York, but I think it was also talking to other people who are foragers and mushroom hunters. It's part of their cultural identity who took me out. And I mean, like, I guess they would identify as amateur mycologists, but people who are part of the New York Mycological Society, which leads treks out, I've never been on one of those, are very profoundly knowledgeable about what they do.
That's so cool.
how's everyone hanging in there? Everybody okay?
Maybe it's time to end.
I was gonna ask for
Back.
We're all like staring at each other.
Wait. I was gonna ask though, is 8 better than 6? What do you think about timing?
I feel like 7 would be better.
I agree. I think 7 would be better.
Okay, thanks, Abby. Abby, do you want to come back?
Abby,
I'd love it.
So.
I'd love it. It was great.
Great. We do it every week, Abby.
So it's like
What
either you
night?
have
Always
Wednesday.
Wednesdays?
Always Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Wait. Good.
Yay,
Okay.
Precog family members.
Yes, I'll send.
I was actually planning to be invisible, which is why I'm in my bathrobe here.
I thought
Nice.
you
I
were
think
in a fancy
next week
dress.
I'll be in my bathrobe because
I
I
had
see
no
nobody's
idea.
dressing up here.
No.
It's great.
Next time we show up in like gowns.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Next time gowns. Next week,
I'm
we're-
gonna insist on, if I ever have a talk, I'm gonna insist on a dress code for sure.
Yeah, start working on it, Drea.
Yep.
Only from the top up, the bottom.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't care about the
Salad
bottom. Just
chicken,
like
yeah.
No pants party.
from like the chest upwards.
But next week
No
we'll
pants
be
part of it.
talking to 2 artists from Mexico City, Lucia and Diego, and they have their own publication. That's, what is it?
Disonare. It's mostly
Yeah,
text,
yeah, but
but they also
it's like
um,
Latin American and American writers, and is it in both languages?
I think it's in both languages, but not everything is translated. Like there are submissions in both languages, and some of the submissions are translated. But they're both. I think Diego is a fiction writer, and Lucia has been making objects, and now has started making other things. But they've like kind of committed to. It's like biannually, right? Or is it quarterly? Anyway, it's more than once a year, which I think to us, I'm just like, I can't even imagine it because we've like putting together one magazine every year is like insane. Marky knows what it's like.
Marky. Hi, Marky.
I had
Marky and I
my
have been playing Words with Friends, but haven't talked otherwise.
Hi, Javier.
Hi, Arveer. Do you have a
Okay,
graphic
so
thing on? Cool.
Hi, Chris. We pick up some
Hi, Alex.
I have to
I'm
run,
literally,
but
like,
thank you
5
so
feet
much.
4 days from a shower.
Bye.
Good to meet you.
Again next week, is that the consensus?
It's great.
good luck. So 7.
So 7 next week. Anybody who wants to be included on our mailing list, just let me know, and I'll put you on.
Yes, please. Gabby, definitely.
Great, I will, Abby.
Thank you.
Now we
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
So good.
Alex,
Good
this
night,
is so
everyone.
interesting.
Take care of
Thank
you.
you.
Yay.